Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Beautiful theater, beautiful projection.
Thank you.
Nicely done. Everything's calibrated perfectly. You guys got a great screening. Thank you.
We actually have a little joke here. We actually affectionately refer to this place as the Millennium Falcon. It's 86 years old. We're always ready to make the jump to light speed, and we're up rewiring things at the last minute. A roof is leaking, or something's going on. So
there's some theaters that didn't. Some theaters like to save, like, I don't know what it costs, an extra $10 or $20 a month by turning the brightness of the bulb down. This is like perfect. You're perfectly set up. It really nicely done.
So I don't know if you mind, but staying with a theme on origin stories, love to know your origin story. Where are you from? How'd you get in? Tell us about your childhood, how you grew up.
Yeah, well, me and my brother made a lot of those sort of 8mm stop motion movies later when VHS was around. We made home videos, that kind of thing. We had that interest. I had a lot of interest in computers and programming and that kind of technical stuff. And once I realized you could put those two worlds together, I was hooked. I got a job when I was in high school, an internship at a company that did computer graphics, a little company called VisionArt, Design and Animation. When I started there, we were doing cable television commercials, and I was there for a little more than 10 years, and by the end we had worked on Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek First Contact and Independence Day, so I got a chance to work on some amazing films there, and we got to be a part of growing that company. It was really amazing.
So how did you come to be the captain of the ship at All Things Star Wars?
Yeah,
how did that work?
About 5-6 years ago, I started talking to Lucasfilm and Industrial Light and Magic, and one of the folks there, John Knoll, who is the creative director of the studio, asked if I'd be interested in coming up and working on a Star Wars movie, and I'm like, yes, please. So we moved up from LA to San Francisco and joined the team up at Industrial Light and Magic.
So were you a Star Wars fan as a kid?
Definitely. The original Star Wars we probably watched 100 times one summer. Our next door neighbor, we didn't have a VHS player, but our next door neighbor did. This was in the era where you might go to the video rental store and rent a VHS player. It was early in home video, and we watched that movie probably 100 times.
Talking about A New Hope?
A New Hope, yeah, episode 4.
What's your favorite?
That has to be my favorite movie. I mean, Empire Strikes Back is so great. They're all great, but it's hard to beat A New Hope.
So, going from being the kid on the other side, like a lot of us were, seeing in the theater, watching it a million times at home, having that childlike wonder to peeling back the curtain, seeing how the Millennium Falcon really operates. Is there any loss of childhood? I'm always worried, like I go to Disneyland, I want to see the Space Mountain with the lights on. I like the mystery and the mystique of it.
So I won't tell you how the ride really works at Galaxy's Edge. You want to keep the mystery.
No, I don't want to know. No spoilers. But is there any loss of that wonder, or is it easy to maintain, being even more immersed in this world?
Yeah, I still have a ton of fun. Like, we're working on episode 9 right now, and of course it's being done in our building. We've been shooting it for a long time, and I'm aware of many of the things happening, but I'm actually trying to keep all the spoilers, keep away from at least some of the spoilers, so I can have some of that enjoyment and surprising. A movie like this, of course, I was involved in the whole thing, so of course there's no surprises to see at every stage, but since I'm not actually the one supervising that film, episode 9, I can actually go to the theater, and when I see it there, I'll see it for the first time when it's finished, which will be end to end at least, which is really fun. I love that.
So how did you go from being the effects person and sort of creative in charge of making decisions at Lucasfilm to actually producing a film? I think a lot of people make a movie don't understand the machinations of who's a director, who's a producer, how did that whole thing work?
Yeah, so on this film I was a visual effects supervisor, and there's a few visual effects supervisors, supervisors who worked for me and supervised the teams in various locations, but I was the head of the department, so I was in charge of all the visual effects in the movie, and you may have seen in the credits I've got that co-producer credit, and that was Kathy Kennedy, who runs Lucasfilm, identified a few people on the film who made extraordinary contributions to the film that were outside of their areas, and that was myself and John Kasdan and John Swartz, who ended up having roles on the film that were broader than our individual roles that we got credited for. And so she actually awarded us those co-producer credits late in the process as a thank you for all of our contributions. Some of you may know we actually had a director change halfway through. It was Chris Miller and Phil Lord who started directing this film at the beginning, and then handed over to Ron Howard about halfway through, and he finished the whole thing. But a few of us were on from the very beginning to the very end, and that is actually how I kind of earned that co-producer credit on the film.
And those are sacred, aren't they?
Yeah, they don't give them out easily. I really felt honored when she did that for us.
That was very nice. So, allow me a little geek and fanboy question. So, I felt when I watched this movie for the first time, which wasn't tonight, I was there day one, I think. I feel like the Han character for us fans got redeemed a little bit and having shot first. You want to talk a little bit about that controversy and that decision to do that in this film? Was there a lot of back and forth about that?
Well, it was. I don't know if you noticed on the writing credits, there's John Kasdan with the lead credit, and Lawrence Kasdan, or Larry Kasdan, is the second. Larry Kasdan wrote movies like Empire Strikes Back, Raiders of the Lost Ark. He's an incredible writer, and he's the one who pitched some of these original ideas, including Han shooting first in that last scene. So he felt very strongly, a lot of people felt very strongly that was the right thing to do for his character moment. But interestingly, it's a very important moment in the film, and you need to know he's still the good guy, because we all know what he's going to turn into. We need to know that Han's the good guy. And I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was Ron Howard's idea, actually, to get that little insert of Beckett going for his gun and putting his finger on the trigger, so you knew that Han was making the right choice even before he shot. Afterwards, they get that little dialogue moment, and you hear Beckett say, "I would have killed you, kid." So you know he made the right decision. But seeing it just with that extra little insert took that sting out, because you didn't want to have that moment of not liking the hero for that moment. So I think that was a really brilliant move to preserve the fact that Han was going to take that first shot. We shot it both ways, by the way. Larry was insistent, but at that time they were like, well, let's get a safety. Let's get a safety where Beckett pulls and misses, and Han can take him out. But the version of the movie is this one, so there you go.
So how about the Kessel Run? That just seemed like an incredibly hard puzzle. Is everybody familiar with the Kessel Run controversy?
How many parsecs? Parsec is distance of time. The whole physics. Yeah.
Parsecs is actually a distance.
Yeah, parsec is actually a distance. So saying I made the Kessel Run in less than 14 parsecs, 12 parsecs, is like saying I drove from Los Angeles to Barstow in only 50 miles, and it's like, but it's a 250-mile drive. How do you make it shorter? So, yeah, the way we worked around that, if you're playing science fiction, science theater, is there's the right way to Kessel, which is through this circuitous route with multiple hyperspace jumps, because the parsec's a long way. You need some hyperspace jumps. So that's the way they went in. You notice they went through that tunnel, and they had all these turns and hyperspace jumps that are on their way through. Then on the way back, Han says, I'm going to take a shortcut through there. He's going to go through the most dangerous way, and the way in it was many parsecs. On the way out, the most dangerous way through that lawn and everything, that was 12, 13 parsecs. So that's the way you try to get to the shorter distance, and of course shorter time, which is what they needed to do to get the coaxium out. So that was sort of the mental ninjutsu that had to be done to try to make that work.
But it was attributed to the ship.
Yes, the navigation computer in the ship would be the only thing that would give them the ability to successfully navigate that. And if you're super into Star Wars geekiness, if you notice, so that's the navicomputer, of course, that's with the Falcon for the rest of the Falcon's life, that has all the problems with hyperspace not working and everything. That's in part because of L3's brain. Even the very first time you meet her before they go on their first hyperspace, are they ready to go to the hyperspace jump? She's going to do the hyperspace calculations, and she hits herself in the head to try to make that work. But that's like Han later is going to be hitting the side of the ship to make it work for the rest of its being. So the whole idea is that she's actually, that's what gives the ship the character that we see through the rest of its life.
I love the little touches in this movie.
There's, if you're into deep cuts, which you might be, the landing gear on the Falcon, was anybody else ever bothered by the landing gear count between what you saw in episode 3 and what you saw in episode 4 and what you saw in episode 5? So when they did A New Hope, the Falcon had 3 landing gear. That was because they only built a certain percentage of it on set. The rest of it was matte painting. It was fine. It looked great. It had the 3 landing gear. By the time episode 4 came around, they had built more of it for episode 4. They built a bigger Millennium Falcon. They needed more landing gear. They needed that extra pair of front landing gear to keep the nose up, so they just built it. It looked great. But there was kind of a discontinuity between the two shows. So again, we were kind of backing into this, and we're like, well, we're going to do 3, or we're going to do, you know, the full landing gear for this movie. It happens before, but you know, the one that everybody loves is the Millennium Falcon from Empire Strikes Back. So we put on all the landing gear, and then in the middle of the Kessel Run, if you're watching really closely, he does that slide on that ice rock, and there's one insert shot that lasts about a second or less, where you cut into the front landing gears, we break them off. So our story is, the Millennium Falcon had all the landing gear that it has for the rest of its life. He broke off the front landing gear doing the Kessel Run. You see it do that crash landing and it noses in. And, you know, they've been working on repairing the ship. You see it in A New Hope. It's still a hunk of junk. Chewie's constantly working on it. And by the time he gets to Empire Strikes Back, he's finally got the front gear back on. So, the continuity of the saga is restored.
So I ask all these things to leave with a bigger question. Who's managing this universe? Who's writing the Bible now that Sir George is no longer in charge?
Yeah, so at Lucasfilm we actually have a story team, a team of people who are focused on the kind of continuity of the story. And to be honest, their job, more than being like the story police, they're more the story enablers. So filmmakers come to them and say, this is the story I want to tell. Have I introduced any continuity problems in the saga, in the canon? And they, you know, identify things. Oh, it might be a little challenging if you want to have a different number of landing gear. And then we all try to creatively come up with solutions to make sure the fans are going to be satisfied. And even with that team, you know, there's some things you just go, oh, that's not going to perfectly align, but it's the right story. So you got to make a great movie first, and then worry about the continuity. But one of the particularly fun people that I get to work with is Pablo Hidalgo. He's a story expert. He knows the.
He writes the comics too, yes.
Sorry?
And he's writing some of the comics too, yes.
Pablo has, I don't know actually for sure. You're probably right. Yeah, Pablo writes a lot. He writes a lot, so he probably has.
Cool. So I want to take this opportunity because I'm sure there's other people that have questions out there for Rob. Looks like we got a first hand right here. We do have a microphone. Not sure where it's coming down the aisle right now.
Hi, thanks for being here, and thank you for such an awesome Star Wars movie. That was a fantastic movie. And it's so good that my question is, please tell me we're going to have some kind of sequel to this.
Well, there you go. I think it's going to be up to the fans. There is a campaign that has been fairly sustained with a hashtag #MakeSolo2Happen on Twitter. You can certainly feel free to join that. The fans definitely are responsible for a lot of the things that have happened in Star Wars and things that have been brought back, so it's very possible.
That sounds pretty good.
Who knows? I'm definitely not making any promises. If I were the one if I could greenlight it, I would, but I don't have that sort of power.
Okay, well, we're all going to make sure it happens.
Any other questions?
Maybe yell it out.
There's one there back there. Would you have the opportunity to produce the next one if it goes up?
I would love to. Yeah, I would love to. I don't know that I would. I don't know that but I would want to. Yeah, watching it tonight was fun. I haven't watched it in a theater in a long time, so it was fun to watch it. I'm like, oh, I want to make another one.
Hi, fantastic showing. Thank you very much. I read the A.C. Crispin books, the Young Han Solo trilogy, as a kid and devoured those books. How much of that played into your writing of this one? Because I noticed that there are some similarities between those stories and some of the plot beats of this film.
Yeah, you know, I actually haven't read the books to be able to tell you for sure. I know John Kasdan is a fan of a lot of those. I know that when Lando Calrissian is sitting in the cockpit doing his chronicles, those are based on some of those Star Wars classic things that now are in, I can't remember, is it called Extended? So, yeah, Expanded Universe. So some of those throws to those things are because everybody involved is such a fan of some of that era of work. Yeah, and I think some of the inspiration, there have been some stories that have had explored different ways to make the Kessel Run work, and I know there were some ideas that fit between that as well.
So you were, we got another question? While we wait for the mic to travel. So you were here this morning and you gave a little, very inspirational talk about creativity in general, but I love the moment you talked about, and I know you kind of retained that boyhood wonder of getting into the cockpit for the first time. Or let this guy ask this question, but I want you to follow up with that, what your experience was.
Hi Rob, thanks for coming. I know you guys had a lot of work to do on this film and with Rogue One, with coming up with a lot of new characters and new designs, and I know the team has been really good about trying to meld the like animatronic designs with the computer generated designs, and even with a character like L3, it kind of blurs that line because you can't really tell. So I'm wondering what I know you have to work with production team, production design, and costume, and everyone has to work together, but do you have any insight on to how you guys decide what you're going to do live action and what's going to be generated after the fact?
Yeah, that's a great question. L3 is a perfect example of that. Our goal on this movie was to make everything as practical as possible, meaning get everything in camera that we possibly could. So L3 specifically, Phoebe Waller-Bridge was on set every day. She was wearing a blue suit, or a green suit depending on the scene, and she was wearing a full costume. Every piece of L3 that we could do practically, we did. So her head, her chest plate, her outside of her arms, outside of her legs, her boots, well, part of her boots at least. That was all real on set that the costume department had made, and they made articulating versions of all that. So the way she walks is driven by the special boots they created that gave her a special kind of gait. And I got to work with Phoebe to try different ways of walking, and we would test it out. I'd key her out or get rid of her blue suit so she could see what the droid was doing underneath, and she could refine her walk, which was really fun to get to do. Then, at the end, you have kind of half the pieces, and then with visual effects, we had to go in and add the rest of them. Of course, we had to get rid of Phoebe, so she would be gone, and we had to add all those extra wires that were where her body actually was, the insides of her legs, all those extra pieces had to be added in digitally. So still a lot of work for the visual effects team to do, but we had such a great performance from Phoebe, and we could just use all of that performance directly in the show. So it didn't require a lot of hand animation. It was all matching what she did and bringing it straight into the movie, which I think is really fun, especially when you get those great scenes between Phoebe and Donald in the cockpit, but that's L3 and Lando in the cockpit, and you get all that great interaction. That's in part, you get those wonderful moments because they're both really there. They really can look at each other and play off each other. So I really like it when we can make that kind of hybrid approach work.
So tell us about being in the cockpit for the first time.
Yeah, early on, the Millennium Falcon was actually still standing from the previous movie when we got to Pinewood. So we shot out at Pinewood Studios in London, and went into the soundstage. The Millennium Falcon was standing set. I got some pictures of it, and then I walked around, and the cockpit was actually on the interior Falcon set. So you could actually walk the whole way around from that room that connects to the cockpit, down the hallway of the cockpit, or down the hallway that connects to the cockpit, and walk right in and sit down. So, of course, I sat down, and actually my brother's here. I actually called him, and I'm like, you're never gonna guess where I'm sitting right now. I was sitting in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. I'm like, I can touch the hyperspace levers from where I'm sitting. So it was pretty amazing to actually get to see the real thing and sit in the real cockpit.
And the technology, how did that work as far as the filming? You just tried to do everything very as practical as possible, which ended up having an effect on the actors' performances.
Yeah.
I know we don't have our visual backup like you had this morning, but
yeah, we did that for the cockpit with this wraparound screen. Another thing that you just saw in the film was that speeder chase at the beginning of the movie. So those speeders were real speeders in a real location. So we went to an abandoned power plant 2.5 hours out of London. Those are real, like 480 horsepower speeders that can switch on the fly between 2- and 4-wheel drives. So they're custom-made vehicles with wheels, multiple ones. The ones for the car that's chasing them and the car that Han and Kira are in. And most of those stunts were real stunts that were done. And then we did a lot of digital enhancement, of course, because we had to extend the background to make them more Star Wars. But I think it's really great that we got that base to start with that had all those real stunts going on, and hopefully it had a more dynamic feel, more like a real car chase than if we had tried to do everything digitally.
very cool. Any questions? I see one back here.
Hi, thanks for coming. And make Solo 2 happen.
Nice t-shirt.
Yeah, I'm part of the Resistance broadcast. So.
Nice.
Question for you. Star Wars fans were extremely excited, I know, when Maul showed up at the very end. But were there ever any concern for the kind of general fan who thought Maul was dead, or they were like, who's that guy? That bringing him in, was that kind of part of the original, or was it you weren't worried about any of that concern about Maul in the end?
Yeah, there was lots of discussion about who should be the boss there, and if it would be okay for him to show up. I see there's a stormtrooper in the back. Is that a scout trooper? Nicely done. Yeah.
Shadow.
Yeah, so there was some question about that, and one of the reasons we wanted to save that reveal and we wanted it to be a surprise. You saw that leg. Hopefully, you noticed that robotic leg. So for the fan to know exactly what that is, that he had to have a robotic bottom half because he didn't come fully assembled after the last time we saw him. So hopefully people bought into that and enjoyed that moment. He's such a popular character, and because he had been brought back in I think it's Clone Wars, right? Or was it? Yeah, it was in Clone Wars. A lot of the fans already knew that was a possibility, that was actually happening. So it was fun to get to do that in the film. But yeah, there was. If the question was, were there a lot of discussion about it? There was a lot of discussion. And he's actually played by Ray Park in this, so got to hang out with Ray Park, who's a fantastic guy. Can still do all the moves with a lightsaber. It's really fun.
That looked like an improved double blade lightsaber.
Yes, it is. Refined lightsaber. Not surprisingly, he refined it over the years.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Shadow.
Yeah, thank you for coming. What advice would you give for someone in their 20s, like in their beginning of their career, what decisions did you make back when you first started that helped you?
Well, I think especially if you're interested in filmmaking, or I guess whatever your interest is, but especially for something like this, it's a pretty intense job, right? With a lot of pressures and hard deadlines and those kind of things. So if you find something that's in that field that you're really passionate about, I would focus on that component of it. Because there's so many other hard challenges, where it is being done in the world, the kind of hours that it takes to put these films together. You want the actual work to be something you're really passionate about, to kind of carry you through some of those other challenges. But then, I guess at the same time, I'd say, if it is something that you're passionate about, you really love the editing, or the acting, or the lighting, or the camera work, or any component of the process, if it really inspires you, then I would recommend going after that, because it is a fun experience to get to be part of a creative team, because to put something like this on the screen, it is a really fun thing to get to be a part of.
How important with filmmaking being democratized, so to speak, is geography these days? I mean, you got to go to LA to be in the film community, in the film production world. Of course, Vancouver, BC's got its own component. We're closer by the other Vancouver. Yes. Would you say move to LA, move to the Bay Area, especially if you want a job at Lucasfilm?
Yeah. So it is interesting that when I was getting started, you kind of had to be in LA. That's where everything happened. And if you wanted to do visual effects, or you wanted to shoot or write, that was all happening in LA. Actually, much of the work is not in California anymore. Some of it is. Still a lot of TV shows, a few movies that are shot in California, but a lot of it has gone up to Vancouver, BC, London, where we shot this. There's some in Australia. There's in many locations around the world, driven by all sorts of reasons: stage availability, crew availability, tax incentives, other things that drive shows to be shot in different locations. So if you're looking to shoot feature films right now, I don't know, most of the most talented people, I know a lot of talented people in London, because we just did this movie there, and we did all of episode 9, or more or less all of episode 9 there in London at those stages. Those crews tend to keep really busy right now. So you can do it in multiple locations. Vancouver, BC is another really good place where a lot of that happens.
We hope to have a little more production here. You have a question right here.
Hi, I have a question. In any creative project, there's always things that try to get cut halfway through production, or there are struggles to make actually happen during production. Is there a particular part of this film that you were really excited that made it all the way through to the final movie?
Yeah, great question. My mind started going to the things that got cut. A couple things that were interesting that didn't make the final cut were at the beginning of the train heist sequence. We had this sequence with the Kodiaks, which were like giant auks that could run fast, and our heroes were going to ride them to catch the side of the train like you would in an old Western. And it was a really great, we shot all the pieces of that sequence, and in fact, in my making of book, I've actually got pictures of the Kodyaks, and one of the Kodyaks' heads is actually mounted on the wall in Galaxy's Edge down in Anaheim at the Disneyland Park. So that was a really fun bit of the sequence. It didn't make it because we were looking to compress that sequence. It's a big, long action sequence, and if you make an action sequence too long, it can get a little tiring. So we had to find the right length for that sequence. So that's one of the things that ended up on the cutting room floor. I think we had versions of the Kessel Run with or without the Space Monster. And there was a question how 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea it could get. And the idea was the movie starts incredibly grounded in a manufacturing planet, and by the end, there's giant space monsters and crazy colors, and it's the brightest it could ever be. So you get this huge spectrum over the course of the development of the film. And the question was like, is the space monster going to be too far? And there were versions without the space monster, and there were versions with the space monster. There was a section of the Kessel Run that had this race through these ice caves, but we've seen Falcons fly through caves before. So when Ron Howard, right before we were going to shoot that, he's like, you know what? I think we're going to get rid of the ice caves and we're going to replace it with a space monster. Like, okay, so we actually, because of the way we were doing it, we were projecting the Kessel Run. Everything the actors were seeing is what you see in the movie. They actually saw out the Millennium Falcon cockpit and saw the whole Kessel Run happening. So 2 weeks before we were going to shoot it, Ron Howard's like, we're putting Monster back in. Okay. So we had to scramble to get the media ready. We didn't have all of it ready. We had almost all of it ready, so you could have that giant space monster on there. And it gives you those wonderful scare moments when the eye opens up, and all those other moments throughout the Kessel Run. That was pretty fun.
Oh, yeah, right here.
So when Ron Howard took over, what percentage of reshoots were actually done from the other directors from that year?
Yeah, so the question is for when Ron Howard came over, what percentage of reshoots did he do compared to what Chris and Phil had done? I don't know the precise amount. It ended up being a pretty healthy mix. I think most of what's in the movie is what Ron Howard shot, but there's a lot of wonderful stuff that Chris and Phil shot too. And even some of the things, there was like rumors about Chris and Phil making like a wacky hijinks movie. None of that's really what was going on. It was really, they cited when they left the film that there were just creative differences, and that's what it was. The producers and the director just weren't seeing eye to eye, and they weren't necessarily going exactly the same direction. So that was that separation. But what you see, there's a lot of scenes in the movie that Chris and Phil shot, and there's even more that Ron Howard shot. He is, a masterful director, and came in and with very little prep time, just a couple of weeks, he got up to speed on this movie and took it over the finish line. But we did do a lot of reshooting. I was planning to be in London for a year, and I ended up being there for something like 14, 15 months or something. It was a long, we had a long time prepping and shooting the movie, so it was an extensive amount of work for sure.
And that, I got to say, from what little I know, is that's quite miraculous. Usually directors will spend a year prepping for a movie or more, and he did it in how much time?
Yeah, he was supposed to have 2 weeks. I think we were shooting some stuff during that 2 weeks. So I think he was shooting something on the day he arrived in London. We were shooting some pickup thing, and he ended up directing that. So it was, he was very busy. But I mean, he is an incredibly experienced director. He can make quick calls. He pulled a team around him of people that he immediately trusted, and of course he's incredibly smart and savvy and knows story very well. So he was an incredibly good person to drop in to a movie of that scale and push it over the finish line. Also a really fun guy to get to work with, that's for sure. To get Ron Howard to tell you stories it's pretty hard to beat. You're like, so on Apollo 13, when you tell me stories from the days when you were doing the fishing on Opie. He had great stories from that too.
So, thanks for coming up to Vancouver, Washington. I've been a Star Wars fan for a very long time, since I was a little one. So, what would you like to see if there were a Solo 2? What kinds of little treats or little Easter eggs would you put in if you had the authority to do so?
It's a great question. I mean, they're teeing up Tatooine so big again, right? So you're like, we're going to go see Jabba. That seems like a lot of fun. How did Han get in that trouble? That seems good. I want to see him work more on the Falcon. I want to see Han and Chewie have this huge adventure now that they're both in the cockpit where they belong together. I think that all sounds really fun. Maybe I should start writing it and see what happens.
Go for it. Got time for one more question because we got books to sign. Right? We doing books sign? Yep.
It sounds like it.
Just one question. Thank you for coming out here, but you talked about scenes that you liked that were cut. Is there a particular favorite you had there?
Of the omitted or just favorites that ended up in the movie?
The ones that were cut, the ones that you omitted.
Yeah, let's see. The cardiac scene was pretty fun. Let's see if there was something else that really stands out that hit the cutting room floor. Well, there was a scene that I had a cameo in that I believe, yeah. I snuck back in, so I'll tell you the omitted scene. So there, let's see, how did it? Oh yeah, there was this whole story where Han. I gotta remember exactly how this was before. It's easy to forget because once it's edited in this way, you just don't even think about it. So there was the whole story of how long Han was in the Imperial forces, and so we see him as a foot soldier. We see all that, but what we don't see is the way he got there, and that was shot. And I think it might even be on some of the special features on the extended edition if you get it digitally or Blu-ray. So he was going to be a pilot, and he did get to be a pilot in the long version that didn't make the final cut. But on one of his early outings, he gets into trouble trying to help one of his fellow pilots. He ends up crash landing his TIE fighter hard into the Star Destroyer, and then that's why he gets banished to Mimban. And there's two scenes. There's this big crash scene with the TIE fighter that we had planned out and were underway making in production. That was pretty fun to get to be with him in a TIE fighter as he's crashing it early on. And then there's the scene where he's at the tribunal and he's getting sentenced to be in Mimban. And that's the scene that I had a cameo where I was one of the guards who threatened to draw my weapon on Han when he started gesturing towards the judge at that tribunal. So that was a particularly fun scene because all of the guards and all of the Imperial officers were all of the various heads of departments of the show. So the AD and me and the guys who designed the costumes and everybody was in that scene. So it was kind of like a party on set that day because all of us are wearing our Imperial Guard things and we're trying to do our day jobs. So I'm running around putting marks on and making sure our team's getting camera measurements and trying to remember, did I step on my right foot or my left foot? I want the editor to be able to cut with this stuff. So that was pretty fun. So that ended up getting cut out of the movie, and then we went back and did a little bit of reshoot, did a few days of pickups later in the shoot, and that's when I snuck back in. We did a scene where where Han's getting his name. He goes, Han Solo. The Imperial Guard that's standing next to the guy who gives him the name. That was actually me. I'm in one shot for 3 seconds, but.
So I have one final question for you. You're basically running things. More or less. The titles look pretty important. Have you arrived? What's next? Do you want to direct a movie? What do you want to do?
Well, so my current job is executive creative director and head of ILM. So that's the visual effects company inside of Lucasfilm. And we do the Star Wars movies and we do visual effects on 12 to 15 movies a year. So it's a really cool job. I get to work with really great people. I've been doing that job for a little over a year. I feel like I'm still learning a lot, loving that job. Watching this movie tonight, I'm like, boy, I want to make another movie. Because I actually, instead of working on one movie for 2 or 3 years now, I work on a little tiny piece of all of them. So I've been working on The Mandalorian with Jon Favreau, but other folks are supervising it full time. Of course, we're finishing up episode 9, and there's so many things going on, I just get to taste each one of them. So there's advantages and disadvantages of that. But yeah, it sure is fun to get to see one of these movies through from end to end. So definitely a rewarding part of my career getting to do this kind of movie.
Very cool. Thanks for coming. Bob Braden, everybody.